Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you with the Secret of Light study group and discussion group for all things Walter Russell's and all things in the occult. I'm coming to you from the Rogue River in Southern Oregon, where we're having a nice summer here. It's getting warmer. The river is wonderful and everything seems to be blooming. All the flowers are coming out. So it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood in Southern Oregon. Today we'll be discussing Alice Bailey's treatise on white magic, rule number 5. We've been in rule number 5. This will be the third part. It's a long portion. As we've discussed in the past, Alice Bailey came from the tradition of theosophy and is mostly developed the idea of the 7 ray system. But in this, we're talking about white magic, which as Bailey describes, white magic is soul magic and black magic is from the personality or from the sensing body. We're going to talk a little bit more about that with some ideas from Gigi Young and other aspects that are coming into play today. So as I do always, and we're going to look at the collage that's on the screen before you. I put up the collage to put up some images from the study that we're going to talk about from this discussion, and kind of to just look at some ideas and get inspired by the images. So as we go into the discussion, we can actually maybe pull forth from the Akasha concepts and knowledge that is not present in our own mind, but can be inspired by these images. I'll start off by rereading Rule 5. This will be the third time we've done this. So this is called the Treatise on White Magic, Rule 5, Part 3, Awakening the Sinners, Character, Right Motive, Virtue, and Breathing. So within Rule 5, it says 3 things engage the solar angel. Again, as Bailey says, the solar angel is our higher self. It is what connects us to source and to our personality, which is our avatar here on the earth. When that's before the sheath of the one, so the sheath is the personality, it's the walking being, who thus creates and steadily contemplation. Thus are the heart, the throat, and the eye allied for triple service. As we discussed last week, one of the concepts that Bailey's putting forth is that we have to change the polarity of our lower nature, of our lower chakras, our lower 3, which is the root, the sacral, and another one. And we're going to move that up into the heart, the throat, and the third eye. So as we begin to look at that, we're going to talk today about how actually to activate those. So within this images here, as you can see over here in the corner, this is the goddess of virtue within the Ayurvedic tradition. We're going to talk a bit about virtue today. In center here, we have the fire. This is actually kind of a depiction of lighting the kundalini fire that's going to bring these forth, that's going to begin to activate these chakras and move this polarity up into our heart, our throat, and our third eye. Here we have the concept of time, of what time does, of how time works, how time plays into some of the aspects that we're going to be talking about. Here we have Jesus wrestling the devil. This is the idea that we have these 2 polarities that are constantly engaged with each other to determine what is right thinking, what is virtue, what is it that we are supposed to do in this age, and what is our higher purpose that comes through the solar angel. We're also going to contrast some of Bailey's ideas with those of Joe Dispenza. If anyone knows who Joe Dispenza is, he got paralyzed when he was riding a bike. He had an accident, and through his mind, through thinking about his back and so on, he actually regained the use of his legs, and this was through the use of his own mental capacities and the energies that were set forth in him. On the bottom here, we have good old George Gurdjieff. We're going to talk a little bit, read some of his quotes just to kind of break it up a bit and have some fun. Any questions or comments before we get started? All right, let's move on to the discussion. So again, this is Treatise on White Magic. This is number 9 in the series. This is the Awakening of the Sinners. So this is from Bailey's book, The Treatise on White Magic. What steps must be taken in order to produce this vitalization and the eventual synthetic activity of the three centers? Faced with these questions, a true teacher finds a difficulty. It's not easy to make clear the esoteric and paralleling activities, which are the result of character building. So oft the aspirant disciple ourselves is anxious to be told some new thing. And when he is told some old truth, so old and so familiar that it fails to call forth a registering response, he feels the teacher has failed him and so succumbs to a sense of futility and depression. Let us then enumerate them in tabulated form, and then we will deal briefly with each point afterwards. So what Bailey's saying here is that we often look for new information, and when we're given old truths, we may discard those because that's just, the old way, that's just some old knowledge, and those no longer apply to us today. I will say that within Steiner's work, which Gigi Young also follows, they do talk about that we are in a new era. The energies that are coming in, and as our bodies and the cosmos and the consciousnesses evolve, we often can't look to old systems in order to grow today because we have evolved, we have changed, and we have set forth into a new reality and energy body. So it's not that we rely on old systems, but there are old truths that we can still incorporate into our practices today. So Bailey has enumerated these as 9 points, and we're going to go through these 9 points. So the character building, the first and essential requisite. So the very first is character building. The second is right motive. The third is service. The fourth is meditation. The fifth is a technical study of the sciences of the centers. Number 6 is breathing exercises. Number 7 is learning the technique of the will. Number 8, the development of the power to employ time. And number 9, the arousing of the kundalini fire. Again, these were some of the images that we showed on the very first slide of the collage to kind of put these ideas into our minds and to put these images into our mind and how they relate and what resonates with us during this discussion. This last and 9th point, which is the arousing of the kundalini fire, will not be considered at this stage of our training. The reason is obvious. Most aspirants ourselves are at the stage of the 3rd and 4th points, which is service and meditation, and are just beginning to work at the 5th and 6th, which is technical study of the science of the centers and breathing exercises. Let us touch briefly upon each of these necessary steps, and let me enjoin upon you the need there is to realize in some measure the responsibility entailed by knowledge. Do you appreciate the fact that if you were making full use of each piece of information given in the course of the training and making it a fact in your experience, and were living out in your daily life the teaching so steadily imparted, you would be standing ere now before the portal of initiation? Do you realize that truth has to be wrought out in the texture of daily living before new truth can be safely imparted? So this concept that Bailey's putting forth is that if we actually practice these concepts, and these concepts are not new, they've been in many systems, like I said, in the Gurdjieffian system, they appear, as Steiner teaches much of the same thing. All esoteric disciplines really incorporate the same ideas of getting a right mind and a right motive and putting those into service through meditation before we actually can grasp these concepts without the interference of the persona or personality that is purely driven by desires and the electric mind, as Walter Russell spoke about. That electric mind or the animal mind is really from the lower chakras, as we covered in the previous ones. And those lower chakras were and are very beneficial and necessary, especially before, it may be in times where we really had to fight the elements, we had to fight animals, we had a much more hostile environment, and we were really based in our root chakras because that's where we were as a people, as a group consciousness, as a group soul, in our development in our physical reality as we sunk into the depths of matter. But now, as we move into the new eras and the new esoteric thinking, we are now going to take those base desires, try to organize those and utilize that energy in our higher chakras to begin to elevate our areas of thinking and bring in this new way of living through our heart, through our throat, and through our third eye. Any questions or comments before I move on from this part of the discussion?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it seems to me that our inclination is to want a shortcut. And what I mean is, like, we don't want to remember the old stuff. We just want, tell me something new that gets me there quick. Instead of going through the time-honored process that, you know, takes time. Just an observation I made.
Anybody else?
Well, definitely, we are presented with, I mean, some crisis or some choices, and makes us grow. So for sure, like, even if we don't know this, yeah, eventually we get to find a group like this to do the steps, whatever resonates with us. Okay, other people do it with different way, but this for sure. I find that if I try to meditate every day, that, yeah, like, I'm less pulled every which way, you know.
Hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, we are being distracted from the path.
But we have to become the path. So
okay,
one of the things that's in here, it's that yeah, eventually we become the path. It becomes like, that's why that part of the ninth one, that, or moving up, like, if you like, initiation, we become the path. And by the time you go to, if you say first, second, you're already doing it, kind of thing. Like, you have to become it. Like, so anyway.
It's like in Christianity where they, you know, said that, are you a follower of the way before you were ever Christian, right? And the way was this path in which we incorporate these concepts in a framework that can elevate us into this new initiation of consciousness that we are now going to experience as we leave the Piscean age and move into the Aquarian age, as we were discussing earlier. And as this takes place, those old paradigms, those old concepts will fall away, but we will still hang on to some of the teachings that they brought forth because there are esoteric truths in them, but to begin to realize how to incorporate those into our new evolved consciousness and body structure for the energies of this age that are being presented at this time. So the first thing that Alice is going to talk about here is character building. And so these 9 points are to be studied from their force aspect and not from their ethical or spiritual import. So this is pretty small statement, but has a lot of meaning here, that as we study them, that we're going to look at them as their force aspect, not from their ethical or spiritual import. So as we're going to look at these things, we're going to look at this force as energy. We're not going to judge them on a duality basis. We're ethical, because ethics and even spiritual import may change based on your philosophy, your cosmology, and of the time. Ethics do change over time. Thoughts and feelings change over time. And within that evolution, we as a human that is living in this time should take into consideration that the ideas are not just black and white. There's always this area of, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to me? But what truths are universal in order for us to sustain and to bring forth this new energy that we're discussing here? It is the world of force into which the initiate enters, and it is the training he receives as an aspirant, disciple, pupil, whatever, that makes such a step possible. Each of us enters life with a certain equipment, the product of past lives, of endeavors and experience. This is what Bruce Lipton would call epigenetics, that within our DNA, within our structures, we carry all of those of our past ancestors, of our past lives, of the cosmic energies that are out there. We often talk that, we are made up of a multitude of different consciousnesses and different entities that make us up. We can talk about parasites in our stomach and what they put forth. We can talk about the molecules, the cells, anything that with the tissues, the organs. Each of these have their own resonance, vibration, and sentience. And as we bring those together into our form, we then can begin to discern what is this current consciousness that we are bringing forth as the I. And we're going to talk a little bit about the I coming up here. And I might say the I mean capital I, not the EYE. So that equipment has in it certain deficiencies or lacks, and is seldom of a balanced nature, meaning that as we go through these traumas, as we go through these ideas that we once held on to that may not serve us anymore, that actually may have inhibited our growth. Dr. Bear Lando of Alphabetic often talks about that even once we try to bring these consciousnesses into words, that the words can actually get in the way of our actual feeling and meaning for what we're seeing and experiencing. So we have traumas as a human, but we also have remedies that we can overcome the traumas. There's many different ways we can do that. And that's really the reason that we're here, is to begin to incorporate all these different deficiencies that we may have, to actually identify them through our meditation, to our reflection, as we talked about earlier, to reflect upon the personality, realizing the personality is not us, our higher self is us, but most of the traumas and deficiencies actually lie in the personality, in our avatar here on Earth. And Walter Russell talks about that also, that we cannot believe our thinking mind, that our sensing bodies are us, and we must move away from that into a knowing, which is through cosmic consciousness or cosmic Christianity. So, as we have this unbalanced nature, one man is too mental, another is too psychic, a third is primarily physical, and still another is too mystical. One man is sensitive, irritable, and impressionable. Another is the reverse of all these qualities. One person is centered in his animal nature or is strictly material in his outlook on life, whilst another is visionary and free from the sins of the flesh. The diversities among men are innumerable, but in each life there is a predominant trend toward which all the energies of his nature turn. Perhaps he is swayed strongly by his physical forces and lives consequently the life of an animal, or he is swayed by astral energy and lives a potentially emotional and psychic life. Perhaps, like so many, he is swayed by three types of energy: physical, emotional, and an occasional flow of soul energy. The point to be remembered is that the bodies in which we as souls are functioning constitute primarily energy bodies. They are composed of energy units, atoms in a state of flux, of constant flux, and movement, and find their place in an environment of a similar nature. Acting as the positive nucleus in these energy bodies, and at present, in the majority of cases, relatively static, is the soul. It exerts as yet little pressure upon its sheath and identifies itself with them, thus temporarily negating its own intrinsic life. So as we talk about the energy bodies, as you know, I call myself the energy hunter, because for me, everything is energy. And the energy of the body without the sheath. So I think the Buddhists refer to the body as the sheath of food. So what we have is we have our bodies, which is an energetic, energy type form. And this is often talked about, say, when people lose their leg, and is amputated, they still have these phantom pains because the energy signature of the leg is still there. The sheath of food, which is from what we eat and what clothes us, and that's why we call this the sheath. That's why Bailey refers to it as the sheath, because it's really, as I've talked about before, like when you have the invisible man, you can't see him. He is an energy body, but when you throw paint on him or flour or something, he becomes visible. So the idea that it's these materials, these denser elements in life, that when we take them into our body, they begin to clothe our energy body in a sheath of food. So as this becomes more and more prevalent, you know, the more we eat, the denser we become and the less energetic we become. That's why we may feel sluggish. That's why we may feel a lack of energy as we become heavier in our natural bodies. As we begin to lighten that up, we may feel more energy, more energetic, and more spiritual in many ways. Oftentimes when we go into, say, a fasting mode, you know, we can meditate better. We can actually commune better as the veil thins for us and we get less dense in this world. So most men, and again, women, when we talk about men, this is not a gender specific thing. Men applies to both men and women. It's not man and woman. It's just the body of men. The idea is that we all have different personality types. None of us are perfect. None of us should be the same. The idea is not to get everybody the same. The idea is that as we move through this study, we become the individual that we are destined to be with our own unique gifts and personality types that bring together the entire body of the human race and the entire cosmic race of all sentient beings. So as we study this and as we begin to discuss this, we're going to begin to look at for ourselves, what does this mean for each of us individually? Any comments before I move on to the last paragraph? All right. So finally the day comes, however, when the soul awakens to the need of dominating the situation, of asserting its own authority. Then the man, woman, spasmodically at the beginning, takes stock of the situation. He has to discover first which type of energy preponderates and is the motivating force in his daily experience. Having discovered this, he begins to reorganize, to reorient, to rebuild his bodies, not just his body. Again, these are all the subtle bodies that we have. Again, we are not just the walking avatar that we see, that we are not just the sheath that is closed in food. We have many different depths to our bodies. We have the astral, we have the emotional, we have all these spiritual bodies that make us up. And we often forget that if we think our health is just our physical body, but in German New Medicine and other traditions, that is not the cause. That is merely the effect. It's kind of like our bodies are the teleprompter or the screen for what is going on with us, both spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. So as these effects begin to materialize in our bodies, they can be traced back to deficiencies or issues that we're having in these other subtle bodies. As I talked about earlier, this is what William James called empiricism, radical empiricism, where we just can't look at the science side, that which can be measured. We have to bring in all these factors into our bodies and into our thinking. And again, I listened to a lecture today with Lex Friedman, where he was talking to a fellow that, says that this is where science gets going today. That science is saying that, all of our concepts of reality, even within quantum physics, are not adequate to explain what is actually happening with consciousness and with man as we evolve and with our view of reality. So, as we begin to take stock, he has to discover first which type of energy preponderates and is the motivating force in his daily experience. I know when Brian came and visited me, we actually went and looked up the gene keys. I would say that is, it's a free thing. You can go on to Gene Keys and get your readout of your gene keys for your different major energies and gifts and so on, you can actually begin to look at the 7 rays that Alice Bailey talks about and see which light and rays you are, because each person is going to have a dominant ray, a dominant color, and those dominant aspects are really the areas that you can thrive in and actually begin to incorporate and identify your shadow areas. Most of us live through our shadow, through our avatar. And that's just because that's what we've learned, and that's what we're actually programmed to do. We're not programmed to live in our energy and powerful bodies. We're programmed to live in our weaker and shadow sides that only fear because we want to have and we want to gain because we are afraid of lack. So as we begin to live in our energy bodies, we will probably find we don't need as much food as we think. We don't need as many items as we believe we need. And we don't need the security that is provided for us by others from an external nature. And we have all the answers and all we need within, which is called the esoteric path, not the exoteric path. So having discovered this, he begins to reorganize, reorient, and rebuild his bodies. The whole of this teaching can be summed up in 2 words: vice and virtue. That's why I had the picture in the front of Jesus and Satan kind of arm wrestling, because this is really a lot of what men contemplate and women contemplate. You know, what is vice and what is virtue? And again, I think depending upon the time and depending upon the person, the culture, this can vary. So I'm not going to ever say that there is only one path to take within vice and virtue. It's really more of what resonates with you. And I prefer to look at it as, within the Christian tradition, I think it was Paul who said, all things are legal, but not all things are beneficial. Meaning we can do anything we want, but many things are not beneficial to our being, nor beneficial to the collective as a whole of our human race. So as we go forward, I might want to say, you know, look to think about a little bit what is beneficial and what is detrimental in your life, regardless of what Alice Bailey says, but within your life, within your cosmology, within your knowing and intuition, what are the things in your life that are detrimental and what are the things which are beneficial? Any comments before I move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I have to say that it's been spasmodic at the beginning.
Yes.
Just saying.
All righty. I think we can all probably agree to that. Okay, so let's look a little bit at what Dr. Joe Dispenza. I'm bringing him in because he's a newer voice. It seems that a lot of people like Joe Dispenza. It seems that he, brings a aspect which I don't think is that new, but he brings it in a different way that communicates and makes the information consumable for this generation and this age. So Dr. Joe wrote a book about what the bleep do you know? Like what the heck do you know? He says, I wake up in the morning and I consciously create my day the way I want it to happen. Now, sometimes because my mind is examining all the things I need to get done, it takes me a little bit to settle down and get to the point of where I'm actually intentionally creating my day. But here's the thing, when I create my day and out of nowhere little things happen that are so unexplainable, I know that they are the process of the result of my creation. And the more I do that, the more I build a neural net in my brain that I accept that's possible, that's possible. This gives me the power and the incentive to do it the next day. So if you're consciously designing our destiny, and if we're consciously, from a spiritual standpoint, throwing in with the idea that our thoughts can affect our reality or affect our life, because reality equals life, then I have this little pack that I have when I create my day. I say, I'm taking this time to create my day, and I'm infecting the quantum field. Now, if it is in fact the observer watching me the whole time that I'm doing this, and there is a spiritual aspect to myself, then show me a sign today that you paid attention to any of these things that I created and bring them in a way that I won't expect. So I am surprised at my ability to be able to experience these things, and make it so that I have no doubt that it's come from you. And so I live my life, in a sense, all day long, thinking about being a genius, or thinking about being the glory and the power of God, or thinking about being unconditional love. So we can approach life in two ways. We can approach it mechanically, where we say, here's everything I have to get done, that my avatar, my thinking body, my physical body, my energy body that is here on the earth, things needs to be done. And I think when we talk about that, we're saying the word think, right? That these are the things that we think need to be done. But if we actually maybe sit back a bit and think about, how do I want to create my day? We are no longer the slave to our day. We are now the creator of our day. We are now the masters of our destiny. So we often believe that, maybe through the Puritan ethic or whatever, that we have to get these things done, that idle hands are the devil's playthings. But by taking time to actually become the creator, to go into meditation and think about what day I want to create, rather than what do I have to do this day, but what do I want to do this day, that is a big transition for most of us. Once we get to a point in our lives where we may not have to do anything anymore, that we've created enough wealth or abundance or whatever, and we don't have to work, we don't have to, have anything that we have to do, life can become more difficult in a sense, because now we have to think about what it is we want to do. What kind of day do we want? What kind of life do we want? And what kind of life do we want to bring forth into this era, so that we can actually be a benefit to others and to ourselves? So I'll use living as a genius for example. And as I do that during parts of the day, I'll have thoughts that are so amazing that cause a chill in my physical body, that have come from nowhere. But then I remember that that thought has an associated energy that's produced an effect in my physical body. Now that's a subjective experience. But the truth is that I don't think that unless I was creating my day to have unlimited thought, that thought would come. So before this, when I was preparing this discussion, I was listening to Rudolf Steiner, and he said that the one aspect that was prevalent before, say, the 900s, as we came in with Plato and Aristotelian thinking, which through Aristotle, if people don't know it, I mean, Socrates within the Grecian system, Socrates was the first, followed by Plato, and then followed by Aristotle. And Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great took the Aristotelian teachings to the East, where he conquered the East and went all the way into India and brought forth a lot of these teachings. What Steiner says is that there was two paths within the Aristotle teachings. One was the Christ path, the other was the kind of Ahrimanic or earth path that was taken. And I wouldn't say earth, but I would say more of the personality path that was taken. And so within this, we have these ideas that we can become a special or unique individual through the use of esotericism and inner thought. We know that Joe actually cured himself through thought, but the idea that we have no thought that does not come from a spiritual nature was the norm during the Platonic and the Aristotelian age and through the era of Alexander the Great. They did not think that they thought these things up. They did not think that the knowledge that they were getting was coming from themselves. Now, this changed around the 900s, thousands, early 1000s in our era, as we began to develop the scientific mind. And we began to, think that we as humans were thinking these things, and that all of these ideas were from us rather than from the cosmic or cosmic consciousness. And when we did that, we began to push away the idea of knowing and get into this thinking mind that Walter Russell talks about. Now, Steiner also talks a little bit about that this consciousness that came from the sun did come to the earth and reside in men. But again, that consciousness is a consciousness of a source, not of men. These thoughts are not my own. Once I begin to think and not know, then I begin to actually believe that the things I speak are myself. And when I speak for myself, that is when I engage the personality and walk away from the soul or angel of the higher self. So the idea of thinking, and I was listening, like I said, to Les Friedman today, that thinking, does thinking produce consciousness, or does consciousness provide thinking, right? Produce thinking. And the way that a lot of science is moving today is that consciousness provides thinking, and thinking does not, produce consciousness. So that's a big difference within the concepts and approach towards thinking and consciousness. Any comments?
I have a question.
Okay.
Does this imply that there was this relates to ego? So does this imply that before the 900s, folks didn't feel like they had as much of an ego?
Well, from what Steiner says, that people did not really identify with, I myself, they more identify with me as a people. I was a Greek, I was Greek. I was, they more identified with their soul family or their cultural family than they did as themselves as an individual.
Okay.
And so the individualization came in later as we began to develop the I, which we're going to talk about next. Jung calls it the self, the ego, the id, the I.
Yeah.
These are all different concepts. Christ actually brought forth the I am. And so the I am, as we began to see that I am, as we are a drop in the ocean, was actually beginning to be developed, right? And with Christ. And that force came forth. The problem that we had is that it became a mental exercise rather than an exercise of the heart. And so we began, and of the spiritual nature. So we began to develop the I based on individual thinking rather than on spiritual knowing. And we stopped developing our spiritual bodies and began to just read books or take books as our authority, or take other teachers or gurus as our authorities, when really this age we have now is not an age of gurus or of authorities, but of self-discipline and self-awareness.
You think Genghis Khan didn't have his own thinking about himself?
I think he did, but I think that when I look at Genghis Khan, he was very much into maintaining the traditions of the Chinese, nomad. He did not want to settle in cities. He did want to maintain the ideas of living in tents, living off the land, and being more nomadic. So
he didn't know any other way, but he was conquering the world.
Yeah, but he did enjoy. I mean, he did believe that that's what he wanted to maintain as a people, as a race. So for himself, I'm sure he had some idea. I mean, this is not across the board like everybody was in this state at this time.
No, I get it, but and also you mentioned today's scientists. Is this the same scientists that believe in climate change?
Yes, I mean, you mean,
well,
no, I think there's two. Again, there is the mainstream dialogue, and then there are those who are bringing in new energies. I mean, the guy I'm listening to today is not a mainstream person, right?
No,
you're not going to read that, right? In USA Today.
That's what I misinterpreted. I thought that's what you were saying, that science today is looking this way. I'm like,
no.
Which science is this?
Well, again, it's the science that's coming forth, right? It's the newer thinking. It's the quantum. We're actually moving even away from quantum now, like I said, into this age of more of Akashic intelligence, into Akashic and ether, into an idea that we're being ruled by spirit, not by the scientific mind. And it really gets down into the idea, you know, of compartmentalization and of reductionism.
We're going back though. We've devolved.
Yeah.
in my
Well,
opinion.
we've gotten into
Just going back
reductionism,
where we were.
and we're finding that reductionism isn't working, right? That you don't, there is no answers, and breaking everything down to the smallest bits and bytes and examining each one of those. You have to bring, like I said, you have to have this radical empiricism as brought forth through by William James, where we take into all aspects, and that's not a Descartesian, you know, deconstructionism type aspect and view of who we are and who the human race is and who the cosmos are and everything else. That it's not a deconstructionist, but a inclusive concept of looking at all the different aspects.
I don't know. It's hard to. You're relating it to all the different stories that already were told.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could just connect with what you are now and make your own story.
And that's really, I think, what, you know, what we're getting to. We're not looking to the external anymore as much as we once were. We're looking to the internal story that we have. But that, again, we have to begin to develop our bodies. We have to begin to develop our consciousness in a way where we can actually accept that. And as we've talked about in the, I think, the previous discussion, that the man who is not prepared to actually put forth, you know, thought forms that are aligned with source can also become a detriment to himself, right? And so that's why there is some preparation that we need to do before we begin to explore these new ideas of what we're doing as a consciousness and as an individual divine creator.
It's technology. You have to get rid of technology, the fake technology, anyway. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Steiner, you know, says that he thought that it was impossible to get rid of technology, and I'm not. Again, when I was in Silicon Valley and we were developing AI, there was a lot of thought around the ethical aspects of artificial intelligence, and, you know, were we developing our spiritual body or our ethical bodies at the same rate that we were, you know, developing technology? And the answer across the board was no. You know, we were not developing these, you know, and that's what Steiner says too, and that's what Bailey says, is that we've developed our mental capacities far past our spiritual abilities. And this is where we really get into a lot of issues. So the idea that we now need to actually begin to develop our spiritual bodies, you know, at a better and faster rate to catch up with our mental capacities is why we're doing this. It reminds me of back in Jurassic Park, where, you know, they created these dinosaurs and had all these bad happenings afterwards. And he asked, you know, I think it was Jeff Goldblum, the chaos theory guy, says, we were so concerned if we could, we didn't ask ourselves if we should. And so, you know, we never questioned our motives within the development of these technologies, within the development of some of the things that we're doing today. And we're so worried if we can that we're not really worried about should we do these things for the good of ourselves and of our future. And hopefully
if you don't stop doing it, it's not going to change either.
Well, again, we are the creators.
Have it built in.
Yeah. So the idea is we are our own creators. So, you know, what our reality we have, we create. And the more people we get creating a reality without those technologies, or maybe new technology, spiritual science, as Rudolf Steiner says, we will see a new world that may incorporate different concepts than this material silicon-based reality. Okay, character building continued, vice and virtue. Vice is the energy of the sheaths, individualized or synthesized in the personality. So this gets back to the definition of black magic. So vice, black magic, energy of the sheaths is us, the sheath of food on the energetic body, individualized or synthesized in the personality, the straw man, the avatar on the earth, as it controls the life activities and subordinates the soul to the sheaths and to the impulses and tendencies of the lower self. So this is where, you know, when we're in want, when we see that there's a shortage, we run to the store and buy up all the toilet paper, you know, because we're afraid, the sheath's afraid that are going to dirty ourselves or something, and we need all the toilet paper, or that we need all this food, and we, you know, so we just live within this lower self. and we subordinate our higher self to the lower self. When it's the lower self that is the static portion of our lives that keeps us grounded. So we throw away the thing that keeps us grounded to live in a body that is tossed and turned by the tides, as the Christian doctrines say, tossed to and fro, you know, on the seas of the physical and of the lower self. Virtue is the calling of new energies and of new vibratory rhythm. So the soul becomes the positive controlling factor, and the soul forces supersede those of the body. This process is the character building. So it supersedes those of the body. So the soul interacts with all the subtle bodies, not just the physical body. This process is that of character building. Let me illustrate. A man is the victim of an irritable and nervous disposition. We say to him that he needs to be calm and peaceful and cultivate detachment and so gain control of himself. We teach him that in place of a cross disposition, there should be sweetness and calm. This sounds a platitude and most uninteresting. Yet what is really being stated is that in place of the restless, self-centered emotional nature and the activity of the solar plexus center, carrying the powerful forces of the astral plane, there should be imposed the steady detachment and harmonizing rhythm of the soul, the higher self. This work of imposing the higher vibration on the lower is character building, the first prerequisite upon the path of probation. On reading this, the earnest student can begin to sum up his energy assets. He can tabulate the forces which he feels control his life, and thus arrives at a reasonable and thoughtful understanding of the forces which require to be subordinated and those which require to be strengthened. Then in the light of true knowledge, let him go forward upon the path of his destiny. So within this, again, we're talking energies. We're not talking, good and evil. We're not talking original sin when we talk about vice and virtue. What we're talking about is that when we are controlled by our lower natures, this is vice. We bring in the new energies to be controlled by our solar selves, by our higher selves, and try to subordinate the lower selves to those energies. This is virtue. So it's not really based on, good and bad, right and wrong. It's more of what energies are we producing and in what part of our chakra systems are they being driven. And the idea of this white magic is to have the higher chakras, the soul self, drive us and our actions rather than our lower natures. So again, this is the new energies that are coming into place. And as we begin to develop these, we take assessment of those areas. We do some self-reflection on what it is that I'm doing, or am I being driven by lower nature or higher nature? And this is difficult because people, that are around us, our relationships will pull us into lower nature vibrations. It's more difficult than to stay in the higher vibrations of higher self as we begin to have want, have needs, have disease, have things happen to our bodies. It's easier to get into the lower natures of self than it is to become, a higher self. But at the same point, we don't want to get so spiritual that we are no earthly good, meaning that we lose all sense of, what is pertinent in our current reality in the physical nature. And we stop eating properly or doing things that are actually beneficial for us and just think that, everything's a spiritual exercise, because we are still material beings, but we do create, because we are divine creators and transmuters. So next we're going to talk about the right motive. The master of the wisdom, we are told, is the rare efflorescence of a generation of inquirers. The questions which the seeker now asks, and which he only has the right to answer, is, what is the motive governing my aspirations and my endeavor? Why do I seek to build upon a true foundation? Why do I so diligently invoke my soul? The development of right motives is a progressive effort, and constantly one shifts the focus of one's incentive when one discovers himself, as the light shines ever more steadily upon one's way, and constantly a newer and higher motive emerges. Again, let me illustrate. An aspirant, ourselves, in the early stages is practically always a devotee. To measure up to the standard set by a loved friend and teacher, he struggles and strives and gains ground. Later, this object of his devotion and ardent effort is superseded by the devotion to one of the great ones, the elder brothers of the race. He bends all his powers and the forces to his nature to their service. This incentive is in turn surely and steadily superseded by a vital love for humanity, and love of one individual, be he ever so perfect, is lost sight of in love for the whole brotherhood of men. Unceasingly, as the soul takes more and more control of its instrument and soul nature steadily manifests, this too is superseded by love of the ideal, of the plan, and of the purpose underlying the universe itself. The man comes to know himself as naught but a channel through which spiritual agencies can work, and realizes himself as a corporate part of the one life. Then he sees even humanity as relative and fractional, and becomes immersed in the great will. So I'm a little bit more of a Gigi Young follower than I am a Bailey follower in terms of the idea of a devotee or elder brothers or great ones. I am more of the thing that they are not to be looked upon as greater than, but as teachers and guides. That we have all the knowledges within ourselves. For me, I don't look to masters as devotees or as items of worship or anything like that, but they are guides, and to understand that they have, as risen to a level above myself within this astral and spiritual planes, but they are being brought forth as teachers and guides and equals, not as higher beings that need some devotion or to be admired, but to be worked with. Again, that's my own opinion, and that's where I differ a bit from Bailey. Any comments on what I just said?
Well, it's definitely a progression. The devotee part, that was like the time of, I think, of my parents. Believe and never question. I mean, they approach their way to life as, like trying to merge with the love of God or whatever. But yeah, it's also they were doing good things. They thought they were doing good things for certain people, but today we have to look at our actions. Where is our motive? Like, is it to make us feel better? Or is it truly to help the person that's in front of us? Like, when every day, like when we're out there. So you're right. Like the elder brothers, yeah, they're further on the path, but by what we get inside, we get inkling of what we should be doing ourselves. Like we discover that all the time, when we have time. I was thinking of what Dispenza said about the day. Mm-hmm. And what I find is, if you're not too attached to the way your day is to become, yeah, you do get surprised, and you actually understand why you got stuck in the elevator. Mm-hmm. And when you get out there, you meet that neighbor that you're supposed to, I don't know, meet and talk to, or it's kind of, I don't know, I'm just finding there's more of that happening. So we have to be open to be amazed sometime, could be in small ways, but we're not robots, that's for sure. Or I don't want to be.
For me, it's often, when can I get out of my own way, right? Stop doing what I think I should be doing to actually experiencing the moment where the universe is taking me. I told Brian a story that when I was in Silicon Valley, I was going into the store, and there was a young man out in front that was sitting there and asked me for some money. And I said, well, I'll give you something when I come back, and we'll see what you need. So I came out of the store, and he told me that he just got kicked out of his living arrangement because of some stupid thing that he had done. and he'd been, drinking and stuff. And he asked me that, he wanted to buy some cigarettes. I said, well, I'll go buy you some cigarettes, right? So I said, I'll take you over there. So I went over there, bought up some cigarettes, and then began to talk to him. And I said, so, you're a drinker, yeah, drugs, yeah. So my thought was, because I'd done work with alcoholics and addicts in the past, that I was going to try to get him into the Salvation Army or some other halfway house where he could get cleaned up. And he said, well, I don't want to do that. And I said, well, I guess I can't help you then. And he said, I don't want your help. I just want somebody to talk to. And so in my theory, the relationship I wanted to have with him was to help him. And I didn't have the tools and anything to help him. And the best help I could be was just a friend, just somebody to listen to what he wanted rather than trying to impose my will upon him of what I think he needed. And often,
you thought.
Exactly. And so oftentimes when we go into service, we actually try to impose our will of what we think they need, or how they should be like us, or how they, how poor they are because they don't have what I have. And this is sometimes when, so as as we begin to talk a little bit about service, you may want to actually think about what are the motives, the right motives behind your service. And what does that service actually look like? And how much service do you actually need to impose? Or is it just being a friend? Is it just being a calm voice? Is it just being someone to listen to the person and to see them for who they are, look in their eyes and to see them as a person? Is that of service? Or is it that I actually have to do something physically or, give money or something else to be of service? Or is it really just seeing my fellow man, realizing that we're all one? And
you got to see yourself first.
Exactly. And meeting them where they are. And that's really might be more of service than, going out and trying to be that savior type complex or something. So here we are at service. A study of right motive leads naturally to right service, and often parallels in its objective form, the motivating consciousness. From service to an individual as an expression of love, to the family or to the nation, there grows service to a member of the hierarchy, to a master's group, and then service to humanity. Eventually, there is developed a consciousness and a service of the plan, and a concentration to the underlying purpose of the great existence, who has brought all into being for the fulfillment of the same specific objective. Gurdjieff says, if you help others, you will be helped. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in 100 years, but you will be helped. Nature must pay off the debt. It is a mathematical law, and all life is mathematics. So within Gurdjieff, he believed in karma. This is basically the idea of karma, but it's also the idea that Walter Russell talks about of equity of exchange. For when we give forth, we will be paid back. It's just the equity of exchange. We don't look for it. Our motive to do it is not because we're going to be paid back, but that is just the nature of it. That when we do good service, we may not see it immediately, but we will put in a karmic credit that will be paid back. And we can look at it as this equity of exchange, or we can just look at it that this is my service. I don't do it because I'm going to go to hell if I don't, or I'm going to be seen as a sinner. It's just what my heart wants to do. And once we get to a point, I believe, where our heart just wants to do these things, that's when the right thinking, that's when the motive actually kicks in. That it's not because of any reward, it's not because of any payback or any sin that I have to, make up for. It's just because my heart now says, because I am part of the human family, I want to act in the most beneficial way to all those around me. It doesn't mean giving money. It doesn't mean going out and mowing people's lawns. I'm not saying that, okay? It's how is it that I can actually serve with right motive in this service? Any comments on what I just said before I move on to meditation?
Yeah, if you're actually just being a friend, and that's like the ultimate service, and then your motive might lead to some of these other things, but the basis is just being a friend.
All right. So next to meditation. Upon this matter, we will not enlarged that it has formed the basis of much of the teaching in my other books, and many of you are working steadily upon the work of meditation. I have placed forth upon the list for meditation as dangerous and unprofitable to the man who enters upon it without the basis of a good character and of clean living. Meditation that becomes only a medium for the bringing in of energies which but serve to stimulate the undesirable aspects of his life, just as the fertilizing of a garden full of weeds will produce a stupendous crop of them, and so crush out all the weak and tiny flowers. Meditation is dangerous where there is wrong motive, such a desire for personal growth and for spiritual powers, for it produces under these conditions only a strengthening of the shadows in the veil of illusion, and brings to full growth the serpent of pride, lurking in the valley of selfish desire. Meditation is dangerous when the desire to serve is lacking. Service is another word for the utilization of soul force for the good of the group. Where this impulse is lacking, energy may pour into the bodies, but lacking use and finding no outlet will tend to overstimulate the centers and produce conditions disastrous to the neophyte. Assimilation and elimination are laws of the soul life as well as the physical life. And when this simple law is disregarded, serious consequences will follow, as inevitably as in the physical body. So just because we meditate, we actually should check our motives for meditation. Are we trying to gain power? What is it we're trying to do through our meditation? Are we trying to do rich man, poor man? Or are we trying to gain physical abundance? Are we trying to visualize things that may or may not be, helpful to us and to the world and the cosmos as a whole? And as we do this, as we have wrong motivation, we can actually become a detriment to ourselves, because the thought forms, as I said, that we put forth will actually end up engulfing us and taking them with us. The thing that we hate, we become. So the idea of, the devil or sin or something coming in as we meditate and we begin to focus on that. George Gurdjieff said, if you meditate and the devil comes, make the devil meditate. So as we have this idea of, this impure thought coming in, instead of trying to get rid of it, make that thought meditate, right? Make that thought meditate on what it's trying to accomplish and what it's trying to do. So we begin to meditate on the meditation of the thoughts that we're having and begin to actually try to incorporate that energies into our consciousness. I love George. So next, we're going to talk about the study of the centers. And these centers that we're talking about are the chakras that we put forth before. This we are now beginning. It is a study yet in its infancy in the West. So again, in the Ayurvedic tradition, they have been involved with the chakra systems. And so when she's talking about the West, she's talking about really, the European and American lines. And a little applied in the West, and little applied in the East. Our approach will be somewhat new, for though we will accustom ourselves to the names, locations, and relationships of the centers, we shall do no meditation work upon them. Eventually, we shall arrive in appreciation of their vibrations and of their tone and colors, and of the astrological significance. We shall not work with the centers down the spinal column, nor aim at the conscious utilization as does the clairvoyant and clairaudient person. All the work done by students must be done entirely in the head and from the head. There is the seat of the will or spirit aspect working through the soul. There also is a synthetic expression of the personality, and the understanding of the relation of the two head centers and their mutual interplay will come gradually the domination of the personality of the soul. This will lead to the consequent and subjective guided activities of the 5 other centers. The work of these 5 centers will eventually be as automatic as the present functioning of the heart and the lungs and the physical body. The presiding intelligence, the self, seated on the throne between the eyebrows and guided by the light in the head, will be awake to the interests of the soul and as alert as the I consciousness of the average self-centered man. By the rhythm of his divine life and by his conscious cooperation with the plan and functioning through the use of the will, must the discipline in incarnation act as the agent of his soul in the three worlds. So the three worlds are the body, the soul, and the spirit, as put forth in Christian ideology. That the soul is the center, the spirit is the life force, and the body is the physical avatar. And what she's saying here is that we're going to bring these in through the third eye. We're going to bring, when we talk about the head here, we're talking about the third eye, actually between the two eyes. That this is really an intuition that we're talking about, but we're bringing it in through the head. And we're not bringing it in through the heart, but we're bringing it in through the head. We are going to process it through the heart, but we are actually going to bring it in through the head. And through the head, through our third eye, through this intuition, through this idea of knowing, we are actually going to activate the heart and the throat to begin to bring in a new understanding of these energies, and not just, when we talk about the head, this is not our electric brain, this is not our electric thinking. So Gurdjieff said, man has no individual eye, but there are instead hundreds and thousands of separate small eyes, very often entirely unknown to one another, never coming into contact, or on the contrary, hostile to each other, mutually exclusive and incompatible. Each minute, each moment, man is saying or thinking I, and each time his I is different. Just now it was thought, now it is a desire, now a sensation, now another thought, and so on endlessly. Man is a polarity, man's name is Legion. And if you know where, within the Bible, when Christ meets the man amongst the tombs, and he's crazed and, living like an animal, Christ asked his name, and he says, my name is Legion, for I am many. So this may be a reference back to that concept that within us, this is back with Bailey, what she said, that we are made up of many different sentient beings, right? Our cells, our atoms, our molecules, our organs, all these things actually have separate consciousnesses. But what Bailey's saying, that even though we have all these individual eyes, a little bit contrary to what Gurdjieff's saying, we can bring them in control under the soul, under the higher self. We can bring all these eyes into an aspect of having our soul and our third eye control them. But we must realize that there are separate entities among us that don't know one another, never coming into contact with each other. But our soul is what can bring all these together. Our soul and higher consciousness can actually begin to see and resonate with all these other eyes. But once we can realize that there are other eyes in us, we can then begin to discern, what are we being told and how do I want to use that? And that the thoughts I am having may not be of me, but may be of another consciousness that resides within me that has influence upon me. I know that as we talked earlier, we talked a little bit about this idea of this man who was irritable and restless. And it was funny because within the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill W. talks about, they did a study back in the 1920s on what was a common aspect of all alcoholics. And the answer was that they were all irritable, restless, and discontent. And so, I would say that's not just alcoholics, that's the nature of man, right? That would be my answer. Is that their symptom, their effect, that is the cause. Their effect may be that they drink, right? Someone else may be sex, someone else may be violence, someone else, whatever, greed. But it is a spiritual malady of this restlessness and discontent that we have within the eye space. And until we actually center ourselves in the soul, it's my opinion, that we will always have this feeling of irritability, restlessness, and discontent, and that will manifest in some other coping mechanism. And what that will be like, whatever you call it, they call it the drug of choice. So that would be your drug of choice. Whatever you choose to say, this is my coping mechanism to get out of this idea of being irritable, restless, and discontent. So once we study the sinners, now we're going to go into breathing exercise. Any comments or ideas before I move on to breathing centers?
Yeah, I have a question about your story about Jesus.
Mhm.
And the answer, didn't he also then put all of those devils into the pigs and send them over a cliff into the water?
Yes. And, and that's kind of, again, with Jesus' stories, whether or not they're factual or whether or not they're symbolic is a different story.
Sure.
The idea is with it, he was in an area of Jewish control. And if you were a Jew, did you eat pork?
Mm-mm.
So why were all these pigs around this Jewish settlement? I mean, this man may have not have had right thinking for the culture he was in either. So the idea that he's putting these, demons into these pigs may be the idea that he's actually placing them where they belong within the concept of raising pork within a Jewish community. I don't know, but it is a funny story that there were pigs around, right? When this was not.
Translation broke. It wasn't pigs at all, maybe.
Yeah, who knows? But I'm just saying, that it's funny that they chose pigs and not sheep or lambs or other animals also.
That's it. They
I
had
thought it was like across the
Yeah.
lake in a Gentile area that wasn't Jewish controlled. But whatever.
Yeah, there wasn't much Gentiles in Judea where he was walking through.
Yeah, on the other side. Actually.
And then the backup to that story also is that once the house had been swept clean, it was now available for others to inhabit. That once this was swept clean, that the new demons would show up, and they would say, now we have a nice clean house, we're going to inhabit it. So it just means that once we reach a certain pinnacle where we think that we've been swept clean, we still have to be diligent, because there's always forces that are willing to come into a clean house.
Kind of going with this, what you just said, which is why it took me a while to find, I guess, the right meditation or the right group to attach myself with, because one day I was looking in a magazine, and esoteric magazine, if you like, or New Age, and saw this teacher, and took a course with her. And, even like we did like a weekend thing, a few of us, but, and she was talking, she was teaching about money or something, or prosperity. And then all of a sudden she said, "Who taught this?" She said something about somebody thought something, and I can't remember what it was, but I thought that was very unethical. And I said to myself, no, that's not the teacher that I want. Like, in terms of, because all she could talk about is how she could, if she went to dinner at her in-laws or something, and she found it boring, then she would be astral traveling. She'd sit there and be somewhere else, And so one of the things I found by looking at these different, I guess, meditation method or different people is that, like if you don't focus the right way, you can open yourselves, you can open yourselves for energies to come in. And that was something that I did not want. Like I was always a bit leery about certain. So I was happy to finally got something that's more focused, if you like, and guided, so that you get to a point, and it's a point of stillness, and then it's not for very long, but you open yourself. At that point, you're safe. It's kind of like your call. Before you went there, you got yourself like a way to get there, so that you don't have to worry about these energies that could come in, kind of thing. So it's kind of a reference to that. And well, anyway, we're going to learn through this book further, but yeah, it is a concern for sure. Like, I'm not the type that's going to sit there and just, I don't know how to say it, merge with the elements. I do one meditation with a group where we imagine a garden, let's say, and we build it. It's just different meditation, but again, leaving yourself open without is yeah, it's just something that I was very, well, I was concerned about it myself.
That really gets back to the right motive, right? And the right.
What do you want to do with this? Why are you doing this meditation? You know?
Exactly.
Anyway.
And if the devil shows up, make it meditate.
Exactly.
Stop, you know what? Not this, and then, yeah, well, maybe it's not the good time right now. Well, yeah.
All right, so now we're going to talk a bit about breathing, because for most meditation practices, we're going to be around the breath. And this is what Walter Russell talked about as the cosmic pendulum, the inhale, the exhale, and the 0 point within the holding of the breath. So we're going to talk a little bit about the breathing exercises. So little by little, as progress is made, will the needed instruction be imparted. Let me point out, however, that no breathing exercise can be safely used where there is no attempt to impose rhythm upon the life of every day. The two activities must go hand in hand. The effect of breathing exercises is varied. There is an oxygenating effect. The bloodstream is purified and pressure is relieved. A symbolism underlies this, for as the blood is oxygenated, so is the life of the man in the three worlds permeated by spiritual energy. There is the imposition of a peculiar rhythm brought about by the particular spacing and time limits of the breath. Inhalation, retention, and exhalation. And this will vary according to the counts. So again, within Bailey's meditation, it's just not a matter of in and out. There is a retention involved, which is the 0 point within Walter Russell's cosmic clock. And that actually, like I said, within Swedenborg's meditation process, he actually held his breath for quite a while because he believed that in that 0 point, you actually were approaching death, because as you ran out of breath, you were actually beginning to die. And as you began and got closer to death, you actually thinned the veil between you and the spiritual realm. So there is an idea that we have that it's not only just inhalation and exhalation, but there is the idea of the 0 and centering point. There is the subtle effect of prana, which is the subjective element underlying the air breathed in and out, which affects most potently the body of prana, the vital or etheric body. Students should remember that subtle effects are more powerful than the physical effects. They produce results in two directions, on the physical body and on the etheric body. The entire vital body assumes a particular rhythm according to the breathing exercises. This kept up for a long period of time will have a shattering of a cohesive effect upon the physical body and devitalize or vitalize the etheric body correspondingly. There is the effect upon the centers which is most effectual and which follows the trend of the aspirant's thought. If, for instance, a man thinks upon the solar plexus, that center will inevitably be vitalized and his emotional nature be strengthened. Hence the need for students to hold their meditation steady in the head and so awaken the head center. Now, I do practices with Mantek Chia of circulating the chi and the prana and focusing on different centers of the body. Again, this is, I think, what Joe Dispenza did when he actually healed himself. He put his consciousness, on the areas of his body and actually visualized healing going on there. I believe it might be Joe Dispenza that I read that actually he would first concentrate on the heartbeat. And once he felt that heartbeat, he would then take that consciousness of the heartbeat and place that heartbeat on the area that he was wanting to meditate on. And he would actually feel the heartbeat in that area of his body. Mantek Chia also talks about this when he talks about the circulation of the prana up and down the spine. We're not talking about that right now, but that is a practice that I do where I circulate the chi throughout my spine and throughout my body, first up the spine and then down through the front through the chakras. But right now, Bailey is just really talking about concentrating more on the chakras and not on the kundalini or the spine at this time. She wants us to actually concentrate on the head center to really awaken that third eye at this time. So as we look at this, we see this kundalini, we see the chakras here. We see the serpents that go through and wind through on both sides. We also see the points on the spine where the serpent crosses the spine. not only the areas of the chakras. Let no one doubt the effect of breathing exercise upon the vital body. And again, the vital body is really what makes us feel alive, what makes us feel this vital energy that over time can be decimated and lead to, apathy and other things. As surely as eating and drinking build or destroy the physical body and aid or hinder its right functioning, so do breathing exercises produce potent effects if rightly used over a long enough period of time. And what shall I say about the last three requirements? Nothing much, for the time is not yet ripe for their correct understanding. Step by step must the aspirant proceed, and his theory must not persistently run ahead of his experiences. So what she's saying here is that we can go deep into reading and into this, theory that we have of how we should live or how all this stuff works. But until we actually begin to experience it, it's still just a theory. So to spend a lot of time just, that I could spout off different books or different ways to meditate, and I say, have you done it? No. Well, the idea is that you need to do it to actually experience it, so that you actually have a firsthand knowledge of what you're talking about. And your experience with it may be different than what you read, because you are a different soul body. You are a different makeup of different things. We may not all experience the same effects that each other, a separate person would feel, because it's not the same body, it's not the same traumatic experiences that they've had. So the idea of this epigenetics, that we are all unique antennas, we may actually experience different things than what our theory is once we begin to actually put them in practice. Perhaps I can give the clue to each of these three through the formulation of a simple rule for daily living. This will be grasped for those for whom it is intended and not work harm to the unevolved. This rule, when followed, will bring about gently and subjectively the necessary conditions for the manifestation of the requirement. Learn to use the will through the development of steady purpose and the organizing of the daily life, so that the purpose may reach fulfillment. Learn to do something else with time besides organize it and use it. Learn to do several things simultaneously and utilize, therefore, all the three bodies synchronistically. Let me illustrate. When you are practicing your daily breathing exercise, keep your count with accuracy. Listen attentively for the sound that sounded in the silence or the interlude. At the same time, think of yourself as a soul, the imposer of rhythm, and the voice that speaks. This is something which can be acquired by practice by each of you. Discover the serpent of illusion by the help of the serpent of wisdom, and then the sleeping serpent mount upwards to the place of meeting. So here we're talking about, where's the place of meeting right here? The third eye, right? So that as we begin to cultivate this meditation, and we begin to have this as a daily practice within our lives, that, we can begin to have this rest, have this knowing, have the, to actually listen to the sound and the silence of the interlude of the thoughts. That we do more than one thing as we meditate. This takes practice and time. It takes a long time to, sometimes people just concentrate trying to get to the nothing thought. But what Bailey's saying here is that you can have thought, the focus is on what's going on within this silence or this interlude. Listen attentively for that sound. At the same time, think of yourself as the soul. So as we meditate, don't only think of ourselves as the body, but think of ourselves as the soul as we meditate to these higher resonances. All right. So that is concluding chapter 5. Any questions or comments on chapter 5? We had 3 parts. It was rather long. I don't think number 6 will be quite as long. But a lot of it was the activation. As we recount the activation, the ideas of the heart, throat, and eye, of moving the energies and changing the polarity of those to a negative to positive, to move them into the higher chakras, and how that was accomplished within these 9 points. So as we move forth from rule number 5, we are going to look at rule number 6, which is the devas of the lower four, feel the force when the eye opens. They are driven forth and lose their master. This is the work of the eye. So what are devas? You know, I brought that up in case, you know, because there's different ideas of the devas. This is literally the shining ones, a general term for a wide class of ethereal or spiritual beings, some of whom are less developed than humanity in the evolutionary ladder, and others which are more advanced. The word angel has been used as an equivalent to deva, but deva covers a wider class of beings than angels. In Hindu mythology, as a general term of deities, the devas are divided into 33 classes, 33-degree Masons, we've seen that number before, from which originates the other celestial beings numbered to 33 cores, or 330 million gods. As a term representing goodness, the devas are a class of beings suras that warred with the asuras, or the demons. The term asura, however, represented the supreme spirit in the oldest part of the Rig Veda. In the later parts of the term represents the demons. In Zoroastrianism, this original meaning was retained as Azura Mazda, supreme deity who opposes the devas or demons, from the later of which we have the term devil. So the devas of the lower, so these are the lower chakras, will feel the force as the eye opens. Because as the eye opens, we become aware of the soul. They know there's a new sheriff in town, right? The soul is now the sheriff. The soul is now the controlling. It's no longer the thinking mind. It's no longer the animal mind that's in control. And they will feel that force, and they are driven forth and lose their master, which is that master of the personality that we've talked about in the past. So that's what we're going to study, this rule 6. We're going to go into greater detail of that next week. So as we move forward here, this is rule 6 will be on next week. Any questions or comments before we close out? All right, so this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you with the Walter Russell Secret of Light discussion group from the Rogue River in Southern Oregon. Please like and subscribe. As I said, currently on the channel, we only have about 33% of the people who view the videos are subscribed. And please comment. We always look forward to comments and ideas and insights into what we've discussed. And with that, thank you for watching, and thank you all for attending, and thank the group for always being supportive in this endeavor. We will see you next week, and keep working.